Hello and welcome to Citizen Assembly Indigenize, which is a citizen assembly meeting produced by the Universal Community Project. Let's not ask how we can support Indigenous Native Americans with money and flyers, although you can still do that too. Rather, let us ask how we can emulate them and live in holistic balance with each other and our earth. Join kindred spirits in examining Indigenous Native American community systems and traditions. The program will begin with a presentation of Indigenous thoughts and actions. Then participants will discuss ways of implementing the same in our own daily lives. Participants can return and share experiences, what worked, what didn't. Our program will often center around Sherry Mitchell's sacred instructions. Want to get involved? Let us know after the meeting. So let's start with a round of introductions to tell our listeners who we are and where we're from. I'll start. I'm Stacy Gustafson. I split my time between Northern Michigan and Southwest Texas, and my major focus is holistic community problem solving. Daniel, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Hi, I'm Dan Tweed. Been running for Thousand Oaks City Council again in 2022, and actually going to have a booth at the Rotary Club Street Fair on October 17th. So check that out. And I'm from Southern California, born in Inglewood in 1960, and yeah, interested in the stuff Elon Musk wants to do, like making humans multiplanetary and getting government to pay attention to long-term safety issues. And then Larry is here, so he could go next, I guess.
Yeah, go ahead, Larry.
Larry, and I'm retired, residing in Thousand Oaks, California, and kind of enjoying the results of my dad's and my mom's housing in Thousand Oaks, California. And basically, I have Indian blood from both sides, predominantly though with my father, who was Choctaw, Chickasaw, and a little bit of Cherokee in Oklahoma, and which means land of the red man, I guess. Everybody knows that. And I guess that's where I get most of my Indian blood there. My mom claims some, but it's kind of hard to prove it on her side. But Irish, Dutch, English, and American Indian is my known ancestry. So that's enough about me, I guess, right?
Excellent. I can't wait to hear more about your experiences. Thanks for being here. Marcin, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
My name's Marcin. I'm a software engineer from Chicago, Illinois, USA. I'm focused on inequality. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here. Cesare, I'm not sure if you're around, but if you're here, would you like to introduce yourself?
I'm here. Hello, everyone. I'm from the outskirts of Chicago, Illinois, and I'm pickling my own pickles. And if that's not indigenous, then I don't know what is. Thank you for having me here.
Thank you very much for being here, and we'll get your recipe later. All right, thank you so much. We're going to move on.
You don't want my recipe. You don't want my recipe. It's not all that good, but it's but it's indigenous.
You can't screw up pickles. I mean, come on.
But it is a natural way of preserving food, so yay. Today we will be showing a 10-minute video on the great treaty that 5 nations, I believe in Canada, Native American nations follow. It's a great story. There's so much involved in understanding how this came about and teaches us about the people, I believe. I don't have any Native American blood, and I'm sorry if I state anything that's incorrect. I just want to indigenize myself and hopefully get other people thinking about that. That's what the Universal Community Project, that's me and Odell Hall and Daniel Tweed here. It's what we're working on. So I will share my screen and start sharing the video. And guys, please pipe up if the sound is not loud enough.
They were guided by the will of the people, and they created a constitution with 117 articles that guaranteed the rights of the people and the responsibilities of their leaders. That constitution, the great...
Yeah, the sound is pretty quiet here.
Okay.
And this is part one. Keep in mind, there's another 10-minute part two that we can get to down the road, I suppose.
I don't know if raising the volume on my end will make it louder. Do you guys know?
No, I'm not. I've run into this problem before, but I don't remember what the solution was.
Please speak up and say if it's not enough of a quality to actually show it. I will try this again.
Did you click on the button to share the audio from your computer? Like when you click share screen, there's a button to share your computer audio, device audio.
That's probably it. And here's the video.
Before Europeans arrived on what they would name North American soil, 5 nations came together and formed a confederacy. They were guided by the will of the people, and they created a constitution with 117 articles that guaranteed the rights of the people and the responsibilities of their leaders. That constitution, the great law of peace, still guides those people to this day. So who are they? Well, those Europeans we mentioned would call them Iroquois, but that's not really their name. They are the Haudenosaunee, people of the Long House. We don't know exactly when they formed their confederacy, only that it certainly came before the arrival of the Europeans, perhaps by as much as a millennium. We also know the name of one of its founders, Hiawatha. When Big Huge Games told us that they planned to add Hiawatha as a great leader in their game dominations, we got pretty excited. The confederacy he formed is an incredible piece of history of governance, one that has survived for centuries and played an acknowledged role in shaping the United States Constitution. And when we asked Big Huge Games if they would be interested in sponsoring 2 episodes about Hiawatha's role forming the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, they got pretty excited. So here we go. But first, a disclaimer. Much of the evidence of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy's foundation has been handed down through the oral tradition, and where history privileges the written word, a culture that keeps its history through sacred stories will often be left out of the prevailing narrative, or worse, told that they have no history at all. The Haudenosaunee very much have a history, and it's a living history characterized by a variety of perspective and expression. Our goal here isn't to mandate one principal story that must be believed above all others, but to relate one story of Hiawatha as a lens to learn about the living, real, and vital Haudenosaunee Confederacy. Our story begins in Onondaga territory, in a time when people who had once been brothers warred with each other. A chief named Tadodaho led the Onondaga into battle after battle. He was ferocious to the point of viciousness, and although he won many battles, his victories never brought peace, and his lust for violence only grew stronger. The lesser chiefs of his tribe lived in fear of him, and Tadodaho treated them like scum, whose only purpose was to praise and obey him. But one of them did not. His name was Hiawatha. Hiawatha was grieving. His wife had been taken from him by raiders long ago. 2 of his daughters had died of illness that couldn't be cured, and then his 3rd daughter, whom he cherished and tried to protect, died in a tragic accident. Hiawatha found himself looking back on a lifetime of war with regret. This sorrow he felt must surely be shared by everybody who had lost a child or a loved one. War seemed to him like the worst cause of this grief, since unlike illness or misfortune, war could be avoided. At least he believed it could be. He called a council of all the Onondaga chiefs, including Tadodaho, to propose a peace. According to stories he'd heard, their brother tribe, the Mohawk, had embraced a peaceful way of life and were no longer waging war on anyone. Hiawatha said, if we unite with them, we can protect each other. We'll have no more need of war. Tadodaho hated that idea. War was his identity. It was the foundation of his power. Everyone who looked up to him did so because they feared his strength. He told Hiawatha that if he liked this Mohawk peace so much, maybe he should go live with them. And the remaining chiefs, cowed by Tadodaho, didn't disagree. So Hiawatha left. He traveled to the current home of the Mohawks and sought the man he'd heard stories about, the man who had convinced them to give up their warring ways and embrace peace. His grandmother had given him a different name, but now everybody called him the Peacemaker. Hiawatha waited patiently outside the walls of the Mohawk village where the peacemaker lived until the peacemaker came to him. When they met, Hiawatha gave him a string of shining purple and white beads called wampum. The white ones represented peace, he said, and the dark ones represented war. So he had created a string with white beads on either side of the dark beads to show his desire for peace to overcome war. The peacemaker had never before seen wampum used to convey a message, and he liked this stranger immediately. The peacemaker welcomed Hiawatha into his longhouse. When he heard what Hiawatha had proposed among the Onondaga, his face lit up. But as they talked, it became clear that he didn't want just the Onondaga and the Mohawk to be allies. He believed all people could live together in peace, as the Creator intended. Of course, he and Hiawatha agreed that the easiest place to start would be with the 5 nations who already shared similar languages: the Onondaga, the Mohawk, the Oneida, the Cayuga, and the Seneca. Going back to Tadodaho would be pointless. Hiawatha knew. He would never listen, because he never listened to anything but power. They needed allies. They would need to recruit the other nations first. But how? The other nations didn't know him. They wouldn't listen to him. They needed somebody who could reach out to the chiefs of every nation. They needed someone whom the warriors wouldn't attack on sight. They needed Jigonsase. She had become something of a legend among the warriors. Her longhouse stood at a crossroads, and many warriors sought refuge with her on their marches. She was a Seneca woman, but she allowed anyone to stay in her longhouse as long as they agreed to keep her peace. Often, when warriors of different nations came to her on the same day, she would feed them dinner from the same soup bowl. Tradition dictated that anybody who shared food became kin, and they were forbidden to fight each other. Thus, in her own way, Jigonsase had been forging small alliances across the 5 nations for years. They visited Jigonsase at her longhouse, and the peacemaker explained that he wanted to build one just like it, one that brought together all 5 nations under one great law of peace. Women like her would be the backbone of this new peace, because women were keepers of the earth and leaders of the clans. Clan mothers would be empowered to choose the chiefs, to remove them if they failed in their responsibilities, to call councils, and to review new laws. He asked Jigonsase to be his messenger to the women's councils in all the nations, and to bring his message of righteousness, health, and power. And she replied, "That is indeed a good message. I take hold of it. I embrace it." Together, she and Hiawatha journeyed to the nearby tribe of the Oneida as envoys of the peacemaker's message. The Oneida were the little brothers of the Mohawk, so they were more inclined than anyone else to accept the peace which the Mohawk now embraced. Those who knew Jigonsase trusted her and welcomed her and Hiawatha among them as speakers who relayed the peacemaker's message. Then the great debate began. The Oneida had suffered plenty from the war, but could they really afford to put aside their weapons and trust peace to protect them? The elders argued that peace had been the way of their people since the lands had been given to them. That was the past, though, and now they had many warriors who lived to fight and enemies who wanted to destroy them. Arguments were levied on both sides, and the discussion raged for a full year, but the peacemaker was insistent. War was an aberration, a betrayal of the wishes of the Creator and of the interests of the people. If they wanted to be strong, truly strong, they would have to lead the way with their own choices. They must choose peace. They owed it to all of the casualties of war whose bones lay in the ground, whose futures had been cut short. They owed it to themselves to make a new future. They could live without fear if they learned to put hatred aside and unite with a new strength of purpose. Once they embraced peace, others would follow, and they would all gather strength like a ball in the snow. His passion impressed the Oneida, and his arguments won them over. Finally, they agreed. The first treaty of the Great Law of Peace had been formed. Inspired by their success, Hiawatha wanted to return to the Onondaga with this message, and the news that 2 tribes had now embraced it. Tadodaho enjoyed his power, but surely he couldn't stand against 2 tribes united in peace. The peacemaker was willing, but Jigonsase had her doubts. She had heard terrible stories about Tadodaho, his cruelty in war, and his violence toward the women of his own house. "He has an evil heart," she said. "Men like him could never be brought to peace." The peacemaker replied, "It is exactly men like him that I must speak to." So together they journeyed back to the Onondaga, where Hiawatha called together a council. Tadodaho sat across from the peacemaker and did not listen. Once again, he told them that he had no interest in peace, and he wouldn't tolerate any further negotiations. If the Mohawk and the Oneida wanted to embrace this great law of peace, fine for them. That just meant they would leave him alone, so he had fewer enemies to defeat, and he had every intention of continuing to make war on his enemies. Hiawatha left this council in low spirits, but the peacemaker's hopes remained bright. He told Hiawatha to keep thinking about how to bring Tadadaho around to the idea of peace. And in the meantime, the three of them would set out for the lands of the next tribe on their list, the Cayuga. Just as the Oneida were the little brothers of the Mohawk, the Cayuga were the little brothers of the Onondaga. They had suffered greatly from Tadadaho, who treated them poorly but demanded that they fight in his wars. They could never refuse for fear that Tadadaho would turn his much larger force against them. To them, an alliance with the Mohawk and the Oneida sounded like the perfect way forward. The chiefs readily agreed and joined the great law of peace. Now they had taken an ally from under Tadadaho's control. They had diminished him. Perhaps they could remove him from power entirely, but that wasn't what the peacemaker wanted. He needed the people to unite, to choose peace, and to come together like a family. In a family, no one was beyond saving. Luckily, Hiawatha now had a plan. Join us next week as the peacemaker and his speakers return to confront Tadadaho and bring the last of the 5 nations together under the great law of peace. Thank you again to Dominations for sponsoring Extra History and making these episodes possible. To play Dominations, go to your Google Play or iOS App Store, or click the
Plug.
That is the end of the first part, and there is another that ties it all
Yeah,
up.
takes
It's
it all the
really
way through the actual success of the Iroquois Confederacy, which we could watch now. It's 10 minutes. I don't know if you want the rest of the story, or we could just discuss part 1. But
Yeah, let's discuss part 1, and if everybody is interested, we could then go to part 2. But I would like to go around the room and ask you guys, what was the one thing that really stood out to you in all this, like something that you didn't know or very interesting to you? So Marcin, would you like to start?
Well, I didn't know anything about like Indian history, so all of it really stood out to me. Yeah, I didn't, I didn't know the warring portion of the history. I didn't know the peacemaking portion of the history. So like, all of it was new to me.
Cool. Daniel, would you like to go next?
yeah, I like, even though they had slipped into warfare, they all kind of knew that the Creator intended people to live in peace. And I think that's something that really needs to be held on to and retold and emphasized, because peace is a more valid choice than war. You just have to embrace the choice.
That struck me too. Isn't it funny that they would be debating, well, should we have peace or should we keep warring? I mean, who on earth would think we got to keep warring? So I think that's a great question that we could discuss. Larry?
Yeah, I think when you create a standing army and you have these professional soldiers, they're going to be itching for something to do, right? they're not itching to go out and create peace. So that's why even Eisenhower warned about, undue influence from the military-industrial complex,
So Larry, was there anything that struck you from the video?
Well, thank goodness for the intercession of the women into the ability to turn off the aggressiveness of the males, and cooler heads are prevailing. Everybody benefits from that by the women's intercession, I think.
Hear, hear.
Yeah, very true. And what really surprised me was that then, okay, so the men are the chiefs and the heads, but it's the women who appoints them.
Right.
Very
right.
interesting dynamic. Cesare, do you have anything that struck you from the video that you'd like to share?
I'm thinking about it, but can't think of any specific. I have a lot of different thoughts on it. Like, for example, last night I was watching the movie Ironclad, and it's a movie about after signing the Magna Carta, King John, he was forced by the rebellion to sign the Magna Carta. But then as soon as the war was over and he relinquished some of his power, he went after all the people who forced him to sign the Magna Carta, and he started executing them. Pretty clever move. But No, I was just thinking of like the parallels to European history, you know, of something like that. But I can't. I was also watching a video about Sicily and how the mafia developed, you know, and kind of like in the sense the opposite direction, like the dynamics that created like organized crime. But no, I can't think of anything else right now. Thanks.
Okay, that's interesting. Can you think of any European peace treaties where the Europeans had this enormous, like, hey, we have all got to start to get along and we can't war anymore? Does anybody know of that?
Actually, I think Switzerland might potentially offer some of the best examples, but I'm sure you could find examples of it in a lot of different places. But Switzerland seems to offer a really strong and easy one.
Okay, thank you. All right, so did you guys want to continue discussing that, or was anybody interested in watching the next video? Let's ask.
I think the next video it's pretty instructive, the next 10 minutes, because it kind of wraps up how the whole thing shook out. and there might be more discussion meat after we get the whole story.
Larry, would you like to watch the next one?
Yes, let's do.
Marcin,
right.
do you-
He typed "be right back." I don't know if he's still ducked
All right.
out.
let's do it.
Okay, let me flip the camera around, and it was okay, audio and video. It's
It was.
kind of acceptable. Let's see
Yes,
here.
thank you.
Get that same positioning back here. Make a little prop. Oh, I guess that's about
That
it.
looks good.
Okay, so okay, I'm going to start the part 2 here.
3 nations had now agreed to join the Great Law of Peace, but there were 2 more in the peacemakers' sights, the Seneca and the Onondaga. Both were powerful nations, renowned in war, and they had every reason to reject a peace that asked them to lay down their weapons. War might come at a great cost, but it also kept them safe from their enemies, and it gave them power. The Seneca had more warriors than any other nation, including the Onondaga. They had battled Tadadaho many times, repeatedly checking his ambition with their own. But he was far from their only enemy. They fought many wars outside the 5 nations which the peacemakers sought to unite, and to support those wars, they frequently raided their neighbors. Many of the envoys who now followed the peacemaker had suffered or lost loved ones in Seneca raids. Hiawatha and the peacemaker came braced for an argument, but they were greeted warmly. The Seneca had already heard of the peace treaty. Jigonsase, who was Seneca herself, had sent her own messengers explaining the principles of righteousness, health, and power that had convinced her to join the peacemaker. Aside from 2 chiefs who lived to the far west, the Seneca were ready to accept the treaty. But those 2 chiefs had the most warriors and the most reason for not accepting the treaty. They lived on the border. A peace treaty among the 5 nations would protect the chiefs in the interior, but not them. If outsiders came to threaten the Confederacy, they would be the first to fall. The peacemaker called together all the envoys to discuss what they should do. None of them had participated in a council like this before, so at first it was chaos. Everybody talked over everybody else, and when nobody could be heard, they all grew angry. Egos swelled, and they began to hurl insults at each other. They swore that they could never work together, and threatened to return home, call up their warriors, and take to the warpath again. The peacemaker refused to let his life's mission be torn apart in an afternoon. He sat the envoys down around the longhouse fire and declared that they must behave like brothers. The Mohawk and the Seneca were the elder brothers, who sat on one side of the fire and considered new proposals first. If they approved, the issue would then pass to the younger brothers, the Cayuga and the Oneida, who sat on the other side of the fire. And when they took turns like this, everyone's voice would be heard. In short, he established a bicameral legislature. There was no place yet for the Onondaga, so Hiawatha sat with the Mohawks. It had been years since he'd left his homeland, and since he had joined the peacemaker, the Mohawks had welcomed him as one of their own. Now, his place among them allowed him to be one of the first to review new proposals. He quickly helped to resolve the matter of the 2 Seneca chiefs to the far west. The Seneca would be honored as keepers of the western door. The Mohawk became keepers of the eastern door. When strangers approached, the keepers would be the first to judge them and could call up the warriors from all 5 nations if they thought it necessary. but their first responsibility would be to offer peace to all who came and welcome those who accepted it. Only those who refused the offer 3 times would be met with war. The chiefs accepted this, and the Seneca joined the Great Peace. Then Hiawatha made another proposal, one that he believed would convince Tadadaho to accept a treaty and join the final nation to their cause. Debate raged around the fire, but Hiawatha urged them all to keep an open mind. They had secured the eastern and western doors, but there could not be peace among them as long as the Onondaga, who lived in the middle, did not accept it. So the council put its faith in Hiawatha's plan. They all returned to the Onondaga together and met with Tadadaho. His temper flared when he saw the envoys from the Cayuga, whom he had so often bullied, now apparently joining forces against him. Even though he knew he was outnumbered, he immediately rose from his bench and threatened to crush them all with war. "We have not come for war," Hiawatha said, "but to make you an offer. We want you to be the leader of our council." Tadadaho sat back down. This was Hiawatha's suggestion. Tadadaho would have the seat of honor and hold a veto over all the laws which the Council of Nations considered. Including him, the Onondaga would have 14 representatives at the council, more than any other tribe. In terms of the great longhouse that the peacemaker wanted to build, the Onondaga would be the keepers of the fire. They would have the last vote on all proposals, and council meetings would always be held on their land. Tadadaho's mind spun with the possibilities. Through war, he had been able to claim more and more power for himself, but nowhere near as much as he stood to gain through this treaty. 4 nations wanted to stand before him and offer him the ability to decide their laws for them. How powerful he would become. While these thoughts were swirling through his head, Jigonsase stepped forward. She hadn't believed that Tadadaho could be reformed, but the peacemaker did, and she trusted the peacemaker. Even so, she could see the evil ideas slithering through his mind and knew that she must put a stop to them. She walked straight up to him, looked him in the eye, and ordered him to strike her. Aghast and confused, Tadadaho looked around. Who was this woman to give him orders like this, and such orders? He couldn't strike a woman, especially a clan mother, and he told her so. "Is that not what you do?" Jigonsase challenged. "I've heard many tales of your power, of how you, a powerful man, strike the women in your longhouse, how you make men afraid of you by threatening their lives. Why should you now hesitate to do to me what you have done to so many others? Isn't that what your power is for? Will that not be how you lead our people?" Tadadaho bowed his head in shame. Suddenly, he saw all of his plans for what they were, greedy and cruel. He begged for forgiveness. Jigonsase saw that spark of goodness take light in him, and filled with mercy, she ran her hands through his hair and soothed him like a mother soothes her child. Now that Tadadaho was ready to listen, Hiawatha explained the rest of his proposal. All votes of the council would be unanimous. In effect, they all had veto power, and all the nations would be equal, but Tadadaho would vote last, and as the leader they all looked to, he had a responsibility to use his veto only when he could give a strong reason for his refusal. Tadadaho agreed, and at last the Onondaga joined the Great Peace. All 5 nations now agreed to peace, but it remained for them to finalize the laws of their new confederacy. Jigonsase, with her knowledge of every nation, sat with the women's councils and decided which of the former war chiefs would now become council representatives. These men were given antlers to represent their new position, and the women who put them there received strings of Hiawatha's wampum beads, signifying the fact that whoever they might choose to sit on the council, the seat itself belongs to the women. All these representatives gathered for the first time on the shores of Onondaga Lake, where the peacemaker awaited them. Before the meeting began, he asked one of the warriors for an arrow from his quiver. Then he held up the arrow and snapped it. "See how easily this breaks?" he told them. Then he asked for a warrior from each of the 5 nations to give him an arrow. Bundling these 5 together, he bent them with all of his strength, but the 5 arrows together held firm. "When we are united," he explained, "we cannot be broken." Before they could begin the council, however, the peacemaker insisted that all of them cast away their weapons and commit their minds to peace. He chose a white pine tree whose needles grew in bunches of 5. All the warriors uprooted the tree, buried their weapons under its roots, and then replanted it, and became lawmakers instead. An eagle came to perch on this new tree of peace, and the peacemaker explained that it would watch over them and sound a warning if danger approached. Centuries later, men like Benjamin Franklin and George Washington would sit down with the descendants of the first Haudenosaunee Council to learn how they had governed themselves for so many generations. They studied the great law of peace, and later they adapted many of its principles into the U.S. Constitution. As a tribute, they adopted the eagle as their national symbol and placed a bundle of 13 arrows in its claws, one for each colony of the new United States of America. But that's a story for another time. Back to Hiawatha. The council began to draft laws forged by the lessons the peacemaker had taught them. He had always insisted that the government must function for the will of the people, so they decreed that leaders must evaluate how each new law would affect the people for 7 full generations. If they failed in their duties, they would be warned and then removed from office. Only clan mothers like Jigonsase could appoint a new leader, and the peacemaker believed that government only functioned if everyone had a role and a voice. So the men's and the women's council of each clan received the power to propose laws. As the Constitution took shape, Hiawatha wove together strings of wampum to commemorate the new laws. Holding the wampum would help people remember, he hoped, the spirit of each law and the council that passed it. Determined to create something grander than the simple string he had given the peacemaker at their first meeting, Hiawatha designed a broad belt that would become the symbol of the Confederacy. White lines of peace connected the 5 nations of the Confederacy, with the Onondaga at the center, represented by the Tree of Peace. Those lines extended to the edge of the belt, for he hoped that the Great Peace would extend outwards to other nations, an invitation which the Tuscarora Nation accepted in 1722. Haudenosaunee history is seldom told outside of their own traditions, but the legacy of Hiawatha remains a vibrant one. His name and the name of his fellow council members survive as titles given to the council leaders who inherited their seats, and a man called Tadadaho leads the council to this day. The original Tadadaho followed through on his promise to Jigonsase and became a leader that the Haudenosaunee could be proud of, as well as proof of the peacemaker's conviction that men forged in war still carried peace in their hearts. As for the peacemaker, he alone had no successor, for he explained that other men could counsel the people, but none could do as he had done in founding the great law of peace. His work here was done. Thank you again to Dominations for sponsoring Extra History and making these episodes possible. To play Dominations, go to your Google Play or iOS App Store, or click the link in the description. It's free, give it a look.
Thank you very much, Daniel. Yeah, that was great.
Lifetime.
Yeah, and that had a lot of views too. It was almost 1 million views. So that's good. Message is getting out there.
Yeah. So I guess where I would like to go next, how could we emulate what we've seen today? How can we make that a part of our life? Any ideas? I mean, we're talking about real governance here. Something that struck me is when I first read the written treaty, there was a lot of symbolism in it. They spoke much about the wampum and the need to collect soft thistledown for the leaders to sit on for the councils. And I must admit that I felt like that is really silly. Like it's really important to collect thistledown or this kind of thing. But if you look at the way people of all governments use symbolism, it makes me think, why is it so funny to see what the symbolism is for Native Americans? We use symbolism in our flags, in our money and everything. It's just different. So that was a learning thing for me. And I'm not exactly sure how I would be able to work this into my life, but I would try. Daniel, any ideas?
Well, I don't think they were getting paid to be keepers of the law. So that's something we could emulate, like make law giving and law keeping like jury duty, would be a good start. I think.
That is a great idea. But the idea, so when we think of jury duty, it's kind of like, oh, gotta do that. I hate that.
Yeah.
Hopefully we could think of it as more of a privilege and something that people have to train for and be chosen to do by merit.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny, we have to be tried by juries of our peers, but we don't have to live under laws that are made by our peers, because the people that make the laws are, usually of the ruling or upper classes, right? They're not your peers generally, unless you're Donald Trump and Republicans. It's like Bush said, I see my kind of people here, the haves and the have-mores.
Yeah. Larry, did you come up with anything? Any way that what we saw today we could work into our own lives?
Well, I'm fascinated by the similarities. I'm also part Irish, and I see a lot of similarities. But they seem to be tribal in nature, and constantly fought amongst their internal, even though they were in Ireland, but they were tribal as well, and hostile. And it seems to be just a part of human nature that it's very difficult to overcome. And the American Indian, by the sheerest of accidents and the strength of their women, have imposed it onto the aggressiveness of the males and made it work. I'm really impressed.
Yeah, Daniel.
Yeah, maybe the society that does the best to elevate their women is going to be the society to have the most quality, peaceful progress, I think.
And Daniel, you said something that struck me too about, darn it, it just slipped my mind. Cesare, do you have something that you saw in the video today that you would think that we could emulate?
Yeah, actually, I think all of this is pretty easy to emulate. I think the task before them wasn't really all that significant, and we are way past that. I mean, really, all they were doing is just establishing peace. It's not like they were setting tax policy or immigration policy. I mean, there was nothing really all that extraordinary about it. It was some pretty basic stuff. So, and I mean, it's a confederation. That's all they created was a confederation, which is really a union of separate states. There was nothing really done about ensuring the democratic participation within those member states or member nations. So yeah, it's just a confederacy. It's nothing to get all excited about.
Well, the treaty actually includes a lot of laws and how to, like, dispute resolution. It's actually kind of like their court system is very well detailed in their treaty.
Yeah, the 117 do's and don'ts, right? I think we have 117 volts AC house current based on that, right? No,
Well,
that's probably.
Well, we have a lot more do's and don'ts than that. Yay for us.
Yeah. But that only became possible once they had formed the peace and the Confederacy. Then they could work out this list of more detailed, granular structures of law.
Marcin, did you see anything in there that you felt we could work into our own lives?
Yeah, unfortunately, I missed a lot of that. Though it does kind of make me think of the way our government currently is set up with the two-party system. And I'm not sure if this relates at all, but with this type of system and everybody thinking they have a majority on their side instead of a plurality, it seems to empower a lot of people to do the wrong thing instead of negotiate with other parties because they are a plurality instead of a majority. We tend to cram so many people under the same tent, and it just seems to influence radical behavior. But yeah, I don't know. For some reason, it made me think of that, and I don't know why.
Cool, thank you very much. Something that you brought up, Daniel, that I think is really important is, what do? You've created warriors, you've trained them, they're ready to go. What do you do when you don't want to go to war anymore with the warriors? I would have to imagine that the Native Americans have all sorts of things that that men can do within their culture and their society that's not war. But it's really, I think it's really something to think about for us and our men, and how would we change all of our men, which have been trained and brought up to be warriors of one kind or another, whether it's in the business world or the sports world. How do we change that to a more society-focused, cooperative, non-winner, non-destructive kind of thing? Any ideas, Daniel?
Yeah, it's kind of notable that, I mean, we've declared an end to this 20-year fiasco in Afghanistan, and the military is constantly saying, look, we're not nation builders, we're trained to break things and kill people, we're not the Peace Corps, and it's like, maybe they all need to be retrained as Peace Corps guys, like have them get out there, building fog collectors and longhouses and solar powered permaculture robots.
I think that's fabulous, and it's part of what I have on my website, that the United States Army has unbelievably wonderful ways to help community. They figure the only way to get their men to kill people most efficiently is to take care of them and their families. They have to have this set up for the community. So if the United States Army, which is all over the world, would open up their community services to people, not only would the people benefit, but the soldiers who are now helping would not I think would not have all of the PTSD, the issues that come from just being destructive. And it is part of some Indigenous reading that I've been doing, that men, it's totally understood by the Indigenous that men they're the keeper of the fire and the keeper of the ability to kill. And when they would come back from the killing, the community would be waiting there and ready to rebalance them back from the killing to the community. And I think that's incredibly missing in our society.
I just got this idea, Larry did some time in the Coast Guard, and the Coast Guard is one of the, least militaristic. I mean, they're just pure defense. They're a guard, right? So what if we had something called the Close Guard? It could be like a branch of the Coast Guard. It could be like, the Guardian Angels or Neighborhood Watch, or all these community preparedness and resilience things. Because I think civilians need to rise up and take back the power of peace from the wayward standing armies.
That's another idea too. Yeah. Sasadi, do you have anything to contribute to the idea of changing our warriors to non-warriors? Or if that's even something that you would want to do?
Sorry, I had to wash my hands here. Baking a cake now. I used to be a warrior, and now I'm baking cakes. What do you know?
Perfect example.
No, I mean, because I have to. It's cheaper and it's better if I make it myself.
Necessity.
How to, turn the warriors into non-warriors.
Yeah. Do you think that's even a good goal?
I was thinking that even like wars might be a useful way for societies to eliminate from the gene pool people with more violent tendencies, especially with a volunteer-based military. It's a way like to essentially eliminate those genes from the gene pool. But then again, maybe it's not really a good thing to do that, because you always need some kind of an aggressive tendencies to defend yourself against an unforeseen threat. So it's probably not good to overdo with that and turn everyone into a bunch of peace-loving hippies, because then you're not ready for the next threat. So, I think there are programs. I think we definitely can do a lot for that. See, here's the thing. I'm looking at universal basic income being a solution to so many things. Maybe the thing for warriors, is actually the universal basic income. It's a way to retire people out of the military and let them, instead of struggling to make a living, at least that way they have some kind of basic needs met. So I think actually the universal basic income facilitates that process as well. Or just how it facilitates everyone or helps everyone in society would also help former military personnel. But then people just naturally find things that they like. So, I mean, I guess there are different community initiatives that already do those kinds of things.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
One other thing I wanted to add on to that, I think what we might see in the future is actually, especially if we do have a universal basic income, I think we're gonna, I'll call it, to be facetious here, a Japanization of our society. I think like from what I understand about Japanese culture, like when somebody joins a corporation, it's really difficult to get fired from that company because that company will find every way, do everything in their power. They consider you like a member of the family in some sense, and they will find every way to make you useful. And I don't think they're actually obligated by contract or anything like that, or maybe they are. But what I'm thinking is, especially if we do have some kind of a universal basic income initiative, I think employers are going to have to work much harder to get the people, draw people out of the labor pool into their workforce. And so they might start creating programs for how to find, to make use of certain people that they have under contract.
Are you about done?
Yeah,
Daniel?
I'm about done.
Okay, go.
Very similarly to how the military actually, gets you under contract. You're under contract for 4 years, and you might not be suitable for the job that you were originally assigned for, but you're still under contract. They got to make use of you, and they're going to put you somewhere. So actually, we might be looking at corporations moving towards that same model. So that might be a way to also integrate, military people if they're struggling to find employment and meaning. Then corporations will actually do that on their own. That's all I got. Thank you.
Thanks. Daniel?
Yeah, great points. Really, I mean, that sounds almost like futurist, predictive thinking about, with the tides of history and culture and gene pool. And when you said gene pools, war is eliminating like violence in the gene pool. But there's another outcome that people don't see is the winning country gets all the refugees from the conquered country. And because of that, America has like the most rugged, robust, diverse gene pool in the world. So it's like a weird side effect of being, the most militarized country is we also have the most, robust gene pool, and that's also makes us least likely to be attacked because we've got people from every country living here, and the other countries know, well, if we attack America, we're going to be killing a bunch of, our best gene pool representatives that live there. And even like Genghis Khan, he fathered like 100,000 kids during his, military campaign or something. And maybe China's rise to power is an echo of that. So that was just an interesting thought that occurred to me about wars and gene pools. I don't know if that's strictly relevant. Yield the feather.
The talking feather. Okay. Yeah. And I apologize if that's culturally not
appropriate.
Yeah.
Inappropriate appropriation.
So, Marcy, do you have any comments before we move into closing remarks?
Oh no, but thank you, Stacy.
Okay. Let's move into closing remarks then. Is Larry around? Would he like to do closing remarks, or should we just move on here? You're muted, Daniel.
Larry's using the convenience, but I think he'll be out in time if we have his remark last.
All right. Go ahead, Daniel. Closing remarks.
Indigenize. What an important topic. I mean, it's only going to get more important as we realize that we're all of the Spaceship Earth tribe, and we all have bigger dangers than we have been thinking about to prepare for and to anticipate creatively. So I'm looking forward to participating in more exciting indigenized modes. And remember, Bitcoin Pizza Day is only 18 days away. No, it's, geez, May 22nd is 13 days away. Okay, so that's going to be something every year, and it's a great way to, I think, to decentralize is to indigenize, you know. And when you decentralize power, that's the American Revolution. You know, the American Revolution was all about taking centralized power and returning it, decentralizing it. And I think indigenous people, you know, have that spirit almost naturally, just from their contact with nature. You know, there's a biomimicry to the decentralization of power and to open source and to all these great experiments that our gene pool is getting to play with. So that's my closing comment. Thanks again, Stacy and the gang here.
Thank you very much, Daniel. Cesare, do you have closing remarks for us?
No, just thank you for this opportunity. Yeah, thanks for putting this on, Stacy.
Thank you very much. Thanks for coming. Really appreciate it. Marcin, closing remarks?
Yeah, thank you for setting this up, Stacy. It was interesting. I don't have anything beyond that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks for coming. Is Larry back, or should I go?
We can hand him down for a closing comment. Are you able to make it? Well, just give us an audio version through the door here, Larry.
Well, I found it quite amusing and instructive. And I'm proud of the impact that the American Indian has provided as a way, very basically warlike people that managed through the intercession of the women to take control of their warlike nature with the civilization aspects that femininity seems to have in abundance that we as males lack. Bravo to the women.
Yay, I second that.
Thank you so much, Larry. Really appreciate your comments, and I'm sorry we didn't get to talk about your personal experience, but hopefully you'll come back next week and we can get to that at that time. That'd be really nice. I understand that you have quite a bit of the Native American DNA, so that would be fun to talk about. Thank you very much. And my closing remarks, there is just so much to cover from those videos. And yeah, I think that there are ways that we already have included a lot of the governance. Well, maybe not so much. We've maybe bastardized the governance that we learned from the Native Americans, but I hope that we can get back to the heart and soul of it. And when I was growing up and being colonized in schools, I did learn just ridiculous things about Native Americans. And I'm a little sorry that I'm only now taking the time to learn the truth. And it's a beautiful truth. And I look forward to exploring it more and learning more, educating myself about it. And I really appreciate everybody's participation here. And I hope that you will join me again next week. Join us again next week. This is the Universal Community Project meeting. That's Stacy Gustafson, Daniel Tweed, and Odell Hall. Thank you very much, and I will stop the recording.